The entire hillside was strewn with flames from one end of the horizon to the other. That's not me describing this fire. That's a county emergency manager describing what he personally watched happen across the river from a small Washington town 2 weeks ago. Here's the number I want you watching by the end of this video, and it's not the acreage. It's the average daily growth rate, because that single figure explains something about this fire that total acreage alone never could. If tracking real wildfire behavior and the actual science behind it interests you, subscribing costs nothing, and it means you'll be here. As this story keeps developing, let's start with what this fire actually is right now, because the scale of it is genuinely hard to picture until you see the numbers laid out. The Sinlahekin Fire, burning 12 miles west of Tonasket in Okanogan County, Washington, has now burned more than 150,000 acres. As of today, containment sits at 42%. It is, right now, the single largest active wildfire in the state of Washington. Here's how it actually got there, because the growth curve on this fire is genuinely one of the more dramatic ones we've tracked. It started July 26th, sparked by lightning. 4 days later, on July 30th, it sat at 10,427 acres. 2 days after that, it had more than tripled to 36,268 acres. By August 2nd, it had doubled again to nearly 74,000 acres, still at 0% containment. By August 4th, it had crossed 100,000 acres, and as of today, it sits above 150,000. 16 days after that first lightning strike, average that out across the fire's entire lifespan, and you get roughly 9,232 acres burned every single day, for over 2 weeks straight. That's the number. Not a single dramatic afternoon. A sustained 2-week pace that few fires anywhere managed to hold. Here's exactly who watched that growth happen up close. Maurice Goodall, with Okanogan County Emergency Management, described one specific night, August 1st, when the fire made what officials called a significant run north. Spot fires developed miles ahead, jumping roads entirely. Goodall told local reporters that the entire hillside, about a mile west of Tonasket, was strewn with flames across the horizon. That's not embellished language for a headline. That's a trained emergency manager describing exactly what he saw with his own eyes. Here's the good news buried inside all of this, and it deserves to be said clearly. Despite burning across 150,000 acres for more than 2 weeks, this fire has destroyed only 2 structures, a cabin in the Sinlahekin Valley and a small outbuilding south of Loomis. No injuries have been reported. For a fire this size, burning this long, that's a genuinely remarkable outcome, and it didn't happen by accident. Drop a comment and tell me if you're anywhere in Okanogan County or the broader Pacific Northwest right now, and whether smoke has reached you. I read these, and the on-the-ground reports genuinely help me. They help me understand what the official numbers don't capture. It's worth understanding exactly why this drought translates so directly. Mountain snowpack across Washington sat at roughly half its typical level back in April. That snowpack normally melts gradually through spring and early summer, feeding streams and keeping soil and vegetation moist. When snowpack starts at half its normal depth, that entire buffer shrinks. Grasses, shrubs, and trees begin drying out, what fire scientists call curing earlier in the year than normal by the time a lightning strike actually hits. As it did here on July 26th, the fuel is already primed to burn hotter and faster than typical years. This is Washington's 4th consecutive year of drought conditions, and the compounding effect of 4 straight dry years. On already stressed forest, fuel is a big part of why fires like Sinlahekin, Kaiser Canyon, and Little Giant grew so explosively this summer. It's worth putting 150,000 acres into a frame, because the raw number alone doesn't land the way it should. That's roughly 234 square miles of land, an area larger than the entire city of Chicago, larger than Denver, larger than Seattle itself. And this fire has covered that entire footprint, plus tens of thousands of additional acres in 16 days, since a single bolt of lightning struck a stretch of remote Okanogan County hillside that, until July 26th, had never made a single national headline. Let's talk about why containment went from 0 to 42%, because that turnaround is genuinely the more important part of this story than the acreage total itself. For the first week of this fire's life, containment sat at 0. Crews simply couldn't get ahead of it. By August 4th, with a fire already past 100,000 acres, containment had crept up to just 5%. That's the point where a fire this size genuinely tests whether a firefighting operation can actually turn the tide, or whether it simply keeps growing until weather changes the equation instead. Here, weather did shift, but so did the response. As of today, 557 personnel are assigned to this fire, operating under a Type 1 incident management team, the highest complexity classification. This is reserved specifically for incidents requiring the most sophisticated command structure and resource coordination available. Suppression costs on this fire alone have already crossed $33 million. It's worth explaining what that Type 1 designation actually means. Incident management teams are rated on a scale from Type 4, the smallest local response, up to Type 1, reserved for the largest incidents. A Type 1 team brings a fully staffed command structure, specialized operations, planning, logistics, and finance sections, coordinating thousands of personnel, multiple aircraft types, and multi-agency cooperation across state, federal, and tribal jurisdictions. Both Sinlahekin and Little Giant are currently being run by separate Type 1 teams, within roughly 30 miles of each other in Washington state. It's worth explaining what that containment percentage actually measures. Containment refers to the percentage of a fire's perimeter secured with a control line. At 42%, crews have secured just under half the fire's edge. The interior can still be actively burning, and in this case, it is. Unburned fuel continues to burn well within established lines, with intensity typically seen much later in the summer. Right now, crews are specifically focused on securing the lines south of Salmon Meadows and containing spot fires near Toats Coulee. They are also holding lines to keep the fire from advancing toward the community of Conconully. During the fire's most explosive growth phase, thousands of homes lost electricity from Tonasket all the way to the Canadian border. That's an entire rural corridor going dark at the same time residents were being told to evacuate. Smoke from this fire has traveled considerably farther than the flames. Communities like Chickasaw and Oroville have reported degraded air quality. That smoke has been tracked as far as southern British Columbia, crossing an international border into northern Ferry and Stevens counties. Satellite monitoring detected 186 separate heat signatures across the fire's footprint within just a 48-hour window recently. Those detections come from infrared instruments on polar orbiting satellites capable of picking up thermal signatures through thick smoke. This is how fire behavior analysts track a blaze this size across remote terrain without needing aircraft overhead every hour. Remote terrain like the Sinlahekin Valley can hide active fire growth from ground observers, especially overnight or when smoke obscures visibility. Polar orbiting satellites pass over multiple times per day, feeding data directly into mapping systems used for containment and evacuation zones. A 48-hour window with 186 heat detections means the fire's edge was burning intensely enough to trigger many individual satellite passes. This data let officials confirm growth, even in stretches where ground crews couldn't safely get eyes on the perimeter. It's worth being precise about the cost breakdown. Sinlahekin alone has cost $33 million in suppression so far. Kaiser Canyon has cost $60 million, and Little Giant has already crossed $42 million. That's more than $135 million spent within a 30-mile radius in a single county, before any of the three has reached full containment. The bulk of that money covers daily personnel costs. More than 1,500 firefighters need housing, food, fuel, and equipment maintenance. Aviation costs add up separately and quickly, with a single large air tanker drop costing thousands of dollars in retardant alone. This is multiplied across dozens of sorties per day during the fire's most active growth phases. Workforce itself worth knowing, because it explains where more than 4,000 personnel across just these three fires actually come from. Wildland firefighting in the United States relies heavily on a mutual aid system, where crews get dispatched not just from the state where a fire is burning, but from across the entire country, and in cases like this one, from international partners as well. When Washington's own Department of Natural Resources crews and contracted engines reach capacity, requests go out through the National Interagency Coordination Center, pulling in hotshot crews, engine strike teams, and overhead personnel from other states currently experiencing lighter fire activity. That's precisely the system responsible for getting 1,157 people onto Sinlahekin alone, and a comparable number onto Little Giant, in a season where dozens of other fires across the region are competing for those exact same resources at the exact same time. Let's talk about what firefighters on the ground actually do during a 16-hour shift on a fire like this one, because the acreage numbers can obscure just how physical and dangerous this work actually is. Hotshot crews build fire line by hand in terrain too steep or remote for bulldozers, cutting through brush and small trees with chainsaws and hand tools. That work happens in full protective gear, in temperatures well into the 90s, often with smoke reducing visibility to a few dozen feet. Structure protection groups work a different job entirely, wrapping homes in fire-resistant material and clearing brush away from foundations. Both of those roles are happening simultaneously across Sinlahekin's more than 150,000-acre footprint right now, coordinated by that same Type 1 command structure managing where each crew gets assigned each morning. It's worth understanding what happens once containment lines actually get built, because holding a line is a genuinely different job from building one. Crews have to actively patrol it, watching for embers that jump across, or roots burning underground that can smolder for days. That's precisely why containment on a fire this size climbs gradually rather than jumping straight to completion. Each new percentage point represents another stretch of line that's not just been cut, but tested, patrolled, and confirmed to be holding. There's also a mapping and technology layer to all of this worth knowing about, since it shapes how officials communicate evacuation zones. Incident management teams use a tool called the perimeter map, pulling together satellite heat detections and GPS data from aircraft. That same data feeds directly into the evacuation zone, updates residents see through Okanogan County's emergency alerts and the Watch Duty app. Let's talk about the aircraft actually flying over these fires, because Sinlahekin's aviation operation has grown substantially. Helicopters equipped with water buckets draw directly from nearby lakes and rivers, making repeated short drops on the most active edges. Coordinating all of that airspace requires its own dedicated air operations branch, managing flight paths and safety separation. There's a specific weather variable crews are watching hour by hour, worth explaining because it's the biggest wildcard left. Relative humidity typically drops sharpest in the mid-afternoon, right as temperatures peak, and fire behavior tends to intensify most. Overnight, humidity typically recovers somewhat as temperatures drop, giving crews their best window to actually make progress. Behind every personnel sits a logistics operation feeding, housing, and resupplying a workforce roughly the size of a small town. Medical units treat heat exhaustion, and supply chains bring in everything from replacement chainsaw blades to bottled water by the truckload, all coordinated so that crews building line at 4 in the morning can count on a hot meal and a place to sleep. Let's zoom out, because the Sinlahekin Fire isn't burning alone, and understanding what's happening around it tells you why this has become the Pacific Northwest's defining wildfire story of the summer. Just south of Sinlahekin, the Kaiser Canyon Fire, near the town of Nespelem on the Colville Reservation, has burned more than 138,000 acres. Unlike Sinlahekin, Kaiser Canyon has made real progress, sitting at 62 to 63% contained, with 966 personnel assigned. It was actually the largest fire in Washington until Sinlahekin passed it on August 9th. To the southwest, the Little Giant Fire, burning across Chelan and Okanogan counties near Leavenworth, has burned past 122,000 acres. It's the one genuinely concerning outlier. Containment sits at just 5% even after 27 days of burning, averaging roughly 4,133 acres of new growth. More than 200 stalwart 100 personnel are assigned to it under its own Type 1 incident management team. Add those 3 fires together, and you get more than 390,000 acres burning simultaneously across a compact stretch of Washington. That's one region's firefighting resources being tested by 3 massive incidents, all drawing from the same limited pool of crews, aircraft, and equipment. The region has become the country's genuine wildfire hotspot this year. Roughly 46 separate fires were burning across Washington and Oregon combined. Washington alone has recorded 35 active wildfires, covering a combined 615,000 acres statewide. Nationally, roughly 2.8 million hectares have burned, a figure that's actually running about 49% below the 2-decade national average. This means fire activity has been unusually concentrated in specific regions, the Pacific Northwest chief among them. Okanogan County sits in shrub steppe and dry forest terrain that transitions from grass at lower elevations into denser timber higher up. When a fire moves through that layered fuel structure under red flag conditions, it doesn't just burn along the ground. Fire behavior analysts noted group torching and full canopy torching, meaning entire clusters of trees are igniting at once. This is exactly the mechanism behind those spot fires jumping roads near Loomis-Oroville Road back on August 1st. Back in 2014 and 2015, this same county lived through back-to-back major wildfire seasons that destroyed hundreds of homes and claimed 5 lives. The 2015 Okanogan complex became the largest wildfire in Washington's recorded history at that time, surpassing the Carlton complex from the year before. One rancher, Haberly, described migrating hundreds of cattle down Conconully Road during that 2015 fire, smoke so thick he couldn't see 10 feet. This year, watching drought conditions build again, he said he fears a similar situation could be building once more. This year's drought is Washington's 4th consecutive year of drought conditions, with 85% of the state's land considered abnormally dry. On August 1st, Governor Bob Ferguson declared a statewide state of emergency, citing drought, high temperatures, and high winds. That declaration included a full statewide burn ban across all 12 million acres of forest land, running through September 30th. The federal government subsequently granted a federal emergency declaration as well, unlocking assistance for local governments and tribes. Right now, the national preparedness level sits at 5, meaning firefighting resources are, in the government's own language, heavily committed. Washington state alone has now burned more than 700,000 acres this year, the most acreage lost since 2021. There's one more piece of this year's fire season worth knowing, because it's the kind of statistic that rarely gets its own headline. It explains a lot about why fires start in the first place. Roughly 85% of Washington's wildfires are human-caused, whether through unextinguished campfires, sparking machinery, or, in rarer cases, deliberate arson. Sinlahekin isn't part of that statistic. It's one of the roughly 15% of fires with a purely natural cause, A single lightning strike hitting already drought-primed fuel in remote terrain, with nobody around to catch it in its first few minutes. The way a campfire left unattended sometimes gets noticed and stamped out before it spreads. That distinction matters for understanding why this fire had such a head start before anyone even knew it existed. Let's talk about the ecological aftermath these fires are already setting up. What happens to this landscape once the flames finally stop is its own genuinely important part of the story. Severe wildfire doesn't just burn vegetation, it can sterilize the top layer of soil in the most intensely burned patches, creating what soil scientists call hydrophobic conditions, a waxy layer baked into the ground that actually repels water rather than absorbing it. That matters enormously for what happens when the region's next significant rainfall arrives. Without healthy soil structure and root systems to hold slopes in place, burned hillsides become genuinely vulnerable to flash flooding. Burned hillsides across steep terrain become vulnerable to debris flows, sometimes for years after a fire is fully contained. Emergency managers in this region are already factoring that follow-on risk into their long-term planning. Well, before Sinlahekin itself reaches full containment, it's worth understanding how a fire this size actually reshapes the landscape's future fire risk. In the near term, burned terrain generally can't reburn again the following year, since there's simply no fuel left standing. But the specific pattern of this fire, burning through decades of accumulated grass, shrub, and timber fuel built up under fire suppression policy. The areas Sinlahekin has passed through are undergoing exactly the kind of fuel reduction that forest managers have spent years trying to achieve, just accomplished here at a scale and speed nobody would have chosen deliberately. Whether that translates into a genuinely lower fire risk over the coming decade, or whether invasive, fast-curing grasses simply recolonize the area, is exactly the kind of question fire ecologists will be studying on this specific footprint for years to come. Here's something worth knowing about the wildlife and agricultural impact, since it extends well beyond the human evacuation orders. Okanogan County contains significant grazing land, and ranchers across the fire's path have had to make rapid decisions about moving livestock. Wildlife in the region, including mule deer and other species that rely on this specific shrub steppe habitat, face their own version of displacement. The burned landscape behind them takes years to regrow into habitat capable of supporting the same population levels it did before July 26th. Let's talk about the tribal dimension of this fire season, because it's directly named in the Federal Emergency Declaration. The Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation sit directly adjacent to, and in some cases, partially within the fire zone itself. Coordination on a multi-fire season like this one requires genuine government-to-government cooperation between the state and the Colville tribes. That layered jurisdictional structure is why the Federal Emergency Declaration specifically named the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, and the Spokane Tribe of Indians as distinct parties eligible for assistance. It's worth explaining exactly how a fire's cause gets determined. Fire investigators look for physical evidence at a blaze's point of origin, evidence of a scarred or split tree consistent with a strike point, cross-referenced against National Weather Service lightning detection data. For Sinlahekin, that lightning detection data lined up cleanly with the fire's confirmed origin point and ignition timing on July 26th. There's a broader regional weather pattern too. This corner of Washington sits in what meteorologists call a rain shadow, positioned east of the Cascade Mountains, which strip most incoming Pacific moisture out of storm systems before they ever reach this far inland. In a fourth consecutive drought year with snowpack running at half its typical level, that rain shadow leaves Okanogan County with no buffer. Drier baseline conditions colliding with a reduced water supply, producing primed, receptive fuel for a single lightning strike. Fire scientists have consistently pointed to warmer average temperatures and reduced snowpack shrinking the natural moisture buffer forests rely on. Decades of fire suppression policy leaving unusually dense fuel loads standing in forests that, under natural conditions, would have burned long ago, connecting this fire directly to the broader climate conversation happening across the entire American West this decade. I want to be honest about something here, because it would be easy to let a story with numbers this large spiral into something it isn't. The cause of this fire is not in dispute. It was lightning, confirmed by fire officials from the very first reports. This isn't a story with an unresolved mystery behind it. It's a story about scale, duration, and what it actually takes to fight a fire. It's worth explaining the evacuation level system that's shifted multiple times, since it directly determined when thousands of residents had to leave their homes. Level 1, get ready, means residents should be aware a fire is nearby and begin preparing. Level 2, get set, means conditions could change quickly. Level 3, go now, is the most urgent tier, issued specifically when officials determine there's no longer time to wait. This fire triggered Level 3 orders repeatedly, from the initial evacuations near Blue and Fish Lakes to the broader zone, stretching from Tonasket to Oroville. Some zones have since been downgraded back to Level 2 as containment improved, while other zones farther from the ignition point have been added. Fire crews on all 3 incidents have been working 16-hour shifts in genuinely brutal conditions, smoke-filled air and temperatures well into the 90s. The 1,357 people currently assigned to Sinlahekin represent firefighters and support staff pulled in from across the country, many away from their own families. Nobody planned for containment to sit at 0 for a full week while a fire tripled in size, or 3 Type 1 incidents running simultaneously. That's the nature of a 4th consecutive drought year, colliding with lightning-primed fuel across a landscape with little moisture buffer. Fire season. In this part of Washington, doesn't typically end until meaningful rain or early snow arrives, usually sometime in late September or October. The 2015 Okanogan complex, for comparison, wasn't fully contained until autumn weather arrived. History suggests patience, not a quick resolution, is realistic. Climate scientist Daniel Swain described a crisis in Spokane where a dangerous wind shift triggered a major disaster near the city limits. That's the Tonasket, a 150,000-acre fire, a structure-threatening disaster in a city, and a dozen other incidents drawing from the same resource pool. Before any level 3 zone is stepped down, fire behavior analysts must confirm containment lines are secure enough to hold even if winds shift. Hazard trees weakened by fire must be assessed, and utilities, power lines, and gas services must be inspected and deemed safe to restore. Here's something worth understanding. 42% containment doesn't mean the danger is over. Fires this size typically don't slow down in a straight line. A single day of favorable moist conditions can add several containment percentage points, but the journey remains long and requires our collective vigilance. While a single red flag day with strong afternoon winds can erase a week's worth of progress in a matter of hours, pushing the fire past a partially secured line into fresh, unburned fuel. That volatility is exactly why incident commanders on Sinlahekin continue treating this as an active, evolving emergency. It is not a fire that is simply winding down now that containment has crossed the halfway point. It's also worth remembering what recovery actually looks like for the communities inside this fire's footprint, long after the flames themselves are out. Residents allowed back return to find damaged infrastructure and roads undermined by fire-weakened culverts. Water systems need inspection before they are safe, and structure loss leads to the difficult work of insurance claims and rebuilding. This work can stretch on for months or years after the fire itself has become old news everywhere except in the community. Now let's talk about what a genuine, lasting recovery requires, beyond just extinguishing the flames themselves. Okanogan County will likely need years of watershed restoration and replanting efforts in the most severely scorched areas. Continued monitoring for flash floods and debris flow risk on burned hydrophobic slopes is essential for years afterward. State and federal disaster funding typically covers immediate response costs far more readily than it covers that longer arc of recovery. Ecological restoration is often left to a patchwork of state forestry grants, federal programs, and the affected communities themselves. Here's a final piece of perspective. It connects everything back to a single, honest point. A rancher from the 2015 Okanogan complex is watching drought conditions build for a second time in a decade. In a year when snowpack sat at half its normal depth before summer even began. That's not really a story about one lightning strike. It's a story about what 4 consecutive years of drought does to a landscape. It's worth being direct about the insurance and financial reality facing homeowners across this fire's broader region too. Insurance availability in high-risk wildfire zones has tightened, with major insurers pulling back from the most exposed areas. For a county with 2 of the state's largest fires on record in a decade, that insurance market pressure is likely to intensify. Let's talk about what residents can actually do right now, beyond simply waiting for containment updates. Creating defensible space around a home remains the single most effective action a homeowner can take. Signing up for emergency alerts and keeping a go-bag ready with essential documents and supplies are practical steps that matter. This fire has demonstrated something encouraging. A fire that grew to 150,000 acres has so far lost only 2 structures. That reflects improvements in preparation, faster resource mobilization, and more sophisticated satellite tracking. So here's the picture of what's burning. A fire that started as a single lightning strike has grown into the state's largest. It has averaged more than 9,000 acres of new growth every single day for its entire lifespan. A fire burning 9,300 acres a day sounds like a statistic until you see an entire horizon on fire from one end to the other. Based on the growth pattern, do you think Sinlahekin reaches full containment within 2 weeks or keeps burning into September? Please don't rely on this video for your evacuation status. Use official emergency management pages and the Watch Duty app. We'll keep tracking this closely. Subscribe so you don't miss the update. We'll see you in the next one.